Thank you all for coming to our first official hybrid Design Meets event. Thank you so much. My name is Ian Chalmers. I'm the proprietor, creative director of Vivid Design Group DesignMeets in Toronto. But before we go any further, just want to do land acknowledgement. In an important step toward truth and reconciliation, and as members of Canadian society, we acknowledge the traditional lands that our studio and George Brown occupy. We're grateful for these lands and have the utmost respect and recognition of Indigenous peoples, their circular practices and ways of knowing. Our path forward is together. Please recognize and observe and take part in the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is tomorrow, September 30th. Couple papers. Okay, this is our event. And Luigi Ferreira, who you may know, he was one of the first speakers at our first event in 2010. So we were there together at that first Design Meets. It was downtown. We had Luigi, we had the head of design, BlackBerry. First BlackBerry back in 2010 was a different company than it is today. And we were in a bar and we talked about design. We talked about the importance of design, design's ability to transform products, experience. And since then, we've had a whole bunch of events. We've done them on healthcare because we love healthcare. And healthcare loves design. So if you're thinking of going into healthcare in the future, it's a perfect place to innovate. We did public policy, entrepreneurship, artificial intelligence. What about design and AI? That's a fascinating space, especially if you're thinking about, interaction design, information. Circular economy, one of my favorite new topics. Has anyone know about circular economy? You over there in the cheap seats? Yeah, couple? Yeah. You've heard of it. Yeah, if you work in the industry, circular economy is a fascinating one. I'll go on a little bit about that shortly. Marshall McLuhan. Has everyone heard of Marshall McLuhan? Maybe a little bit. Very important Canadian. We had an event for his 100th birthday. He wasn't there, but we had a cake and it was in his coach house. And it was 90 degrees that day. There was no air conditioning. And his cake started to melt and had Marshall's face on it. So if you know Marshall McLuhan, you probably would have enjoyed it. And we sat around and had great conversations. It was an honor. We had a funny one in Waterloo on sustainability, and our team went to rent a vehicle for that event. And we were supposed to get a little compact car to drive out. They said, we're sorry, we don't have any compact cars, but we have an F-150. That's all we have. So here's our team going to Waterloo for sustainability event and an F-150. So, well, we've had lots of good times with these gatherings of design people. So our last one on circular economy, I promised you I'd talk about circular economy, was the second one. We've had a few on green and sustainability, but this one was more around application of circular economy practice. And we had some great speakers who were putting it into their business design or business practice, such as the recycling of garments, the invention or a business around reusable cups or reusable packaging. So how can we regenerate what we use and not throw away? So it's sort of that take, make, waste economy that we're currently in and changing the way we kind of use and think about products. If you are looking for more information on this, as you can see here, the recap is at DesignMeets.ca. So today is DEI, and DEI is a topic close to our hearts because we work in the user-centered design field, because we are engaged in UX, human factors, and because we try to always consider as many people as possible in the development of our work. Diversity, equity, inclusion is having an impact, and we're curious today to have a conversation about what that impact is. So we're exploring education, academia, we're looking at design industry, design entrepreneurs, we're looking at agencies, in-house, and we're looking just beyond sort of policy and programming, but also processes and how inclusive we're being around those areas. We've seen if you're familiar with design processes, such as the D school started, this is many years old, but the process of, if you're in first year, first semester, this will be a new topic for you, but this is a very traditional way to kind of go through product development. And as you can see at the beginning, empathy is there. And empathy is there because that's discovery. That's an opportunity to open up conversation and thinking. So this is before consideration around DEI as a topic, but it was about opening up and thinking about users. This is a Rotman diagram, and diagrams are wonderful for summarizing processes, and they do represent what happens in methods in different organizations, but they don't always take into true consideration the quality of what representation really means. And when you consider users, how are you considering users? Are you only considering people who are engaged and not the people that are disengaged? So how do we think about people who are outside the system to make sure that we are designing for the majority of users? This is the design justice principles. These values and these principles are credible and super important to how we approach our design process with our clients and with our employees, and who we think about who is involved in the process. In this case, who is harmed and who benefited. So how can we develop processes and develop environments and cultures that take this into consideration? And this is something that we do consider. We may not be as inclusive as we think we are when we're designing products. And that means that we can do more harm than good. And that is something that we need to put into question. So that brings me to today in our topic and our speakers. And why we're here is to explore and expand on the DI subject matter. I was introduced to Gavin many years ago, who's opened up my mind and my thinking about diversity with respect to the work that we do. And he sort of changed the way I was thinking. Anna Rita opened up my mind on academia and other projects, and has involved me at George Brown, so that gave me another perspective. Sean is someone that I was introduced to who is outside of our Ontario sphere, but somebody that we need to engage with because he has a whole other frame to look at, not just DEI, but to look at the whole inclusion concept as it involves Canadians. So without further ado, Anna, you're first. So I am going to introduce Anna, and the format is, we used to say 5 minutes. 5 minutes is really hard to nail. So 8 minutes is fine, or sometimes it's 10 minutes. So that's okay. So if you are 8 minutes, that's okay, Sean and Gavin. Your bios could take me about 5 minutes to read. And Anna, you're good. So that's a format. So okay. Serious. Well, no, it's actually all good content. So, all right, Anna. So you're up. Anna Rita Morass is the chair of the School of Design at George Brown College and holds a doctorate from the Communication and Culture program at Toronto Metropolitan University. She's devoted much of her academic career to investigating mobile media, including there's a lot of acronyms here, SSHRC funded research creation doctoral project, Midarive, Toronto, an augmented reality counter archive of Toronto's historical urban environments. Very interesting. And is also the principal investigator on a multi-year NSERC funded project in partnership with Sunnybrook Health Science Center. A former member of the House programming team, a director on the board of the archives, of the recipient of, a director on the board at the archives, and the recipient of Eastern Canada's 2021 RGD Educator Award. Nice. For the new students, do you know what RGD is? Have you heard of RGD? Yeah, right. You should join as a student member. It's one of the largest communities for designers. So
they're all provisional.
They're all provisionals. Excellent. And you might be going to Design Thinkers? No, okay. Maybe you. All right. All right, Anna. Well, over to you. And just use the down arrow. And I will go like this so Sean can see it.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Ian, for that introduction. Again, my name is Anna Rita Morris. I'm the chair for the School of Design here at George Brown College. I want to thank DesignMeets not only for inviting me today, but for holding this session here on our waterfront campus. As you can imagine, it's been a long time since we've had an event here. So very happy to be hosting you folks tonight for what I think is the most pressing issue in the design community. For me, every conversation that happens with an academic institution, especially as it pertains to DEI, should start with positionality. So I'm a Portuguese-born academic educator and administrator. My family and I arrived in Canada by way of Portugal in 1989, making me a settler here on the land. On the back of my parents' sacrifices, I've been able to get my doctorate and establish a career in education, while my parents were unable to be educated past the 4th grade. While I don't consider myself rather a designer proper, my work has always been centered in and around the world of design. These lived experiences frame my view of the world, as you can imagine. So in my role as chair, I have the great fortune of working closely with prospective and current students, alumni who are often become design industry leaders, and then design industry leaders who often become our faculty, as well as other design school administrators and government officials from across the province. Having this many touch points has provided me with a really good perspective on how each of these folks, myself included, play a critical role in DEI initiatives. So tonight, I'm here to advocate for the shared responsibility for DEI across the design landscape. Everything we do in the college space is informed by industry standards and practices. If we want to envision a more equitable sector, we can't tackle this larger systemic issue in isolation. So we teach students to be collaborative, right? To prepare them for studio spaces that they'll eventually work in. And we need to mimic that collaboration across departments and institutions and in partnership with design leaders to dismantle self-propagating power structures. Great. So where do we start? This is an intentionally messy diagram for our lovely interaction design students. You're going to do a lot of diagramming in your 3 years with us, and it's going to look a lot better than this. But it serves to represent this sort of messy tension of power and privilege that we see across the sector. So privilege tends to be based typically on really arbitrary things and unjust hierarchies, as well as perceptions within society, which ultimately manifest across the design landscape. So we know that the design sector across North America is made up of largely white designers. We all probably saw those statistics in 2020. It's a field with more than 85% of white folks represented. So beyond this, it's also a field that's historically aligned with cisgendered middle-class men who are formally educated and tend to be neurotypical. So how are we making space to allow everyone to show up as they are if they don't fit into those categories? How do we encourage prospective students from equity-deserving groups to choose design as a program of study? More so, how do we, as an industry, talk about the role of design in shaping our future? How do we talk about design as a product to create culture and not just to consume goods? Who gets to consider design as a career trajectory? We tell people that are really strong problem solvers or critical thinkers that they should be lawyers or engineers. But we don't tell them that they'd make a really good designer, despite it being one of the most prominent solution-focused careers. I often hear from current students that their immigrant parents don't understand what they're in school for. How many people are experiencing that right now? Yeah, okay, same. How can we change this narrative? And where does DEI fit into all of this? So we've taken equity, diversity, and inclusion as sort of interchangeable phrases that simply mean do the right thing. So I'd like to ground these definitions from a design context so that we can use them a little bit more today. Writer and designer Jennifer Rittner asserts that diversity represents who occupies design practices and design spaces and opinions. If diversity represents the who, then inclusion helps us understand how. It underscores the ways in which these spaces are occupied and how we intend to impact changes across the landscape. In response, equity asks to what end? By considering the varying circumstances and needs of each individual designer and allocating necessary resources to reach an equal outcome for everyone. So thinking about the design education ecosystem through these lenses, which are some of our biggest DEI initiatives, and how do we set actionable goals for them? Now, this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but I wanted to sort of get everyone thinking about some of the things that we've been tackling, some of the larger problems that we're going to continue to tackle, and some of the things that we definitely need some help with. So as a matter of principle, DEI belongs in every decision we're making in education, from recruitment and enrollment strategies, curriculum structures and learning experiences, as well as hiring practices. So I won't have time to go into these in too much detail, but I know that we're going to do a Q&A and can definitely chat about these in more detail. But the point is that the task is so much more than simply looking at what we teach and saying, okay, let's diversify the voices that are at the table. We also have to think about how we teach and how we talk about design, where we teach, and perhaps most critically, who we teach to. So under the framework of DEI, these actions are all interconnected. So when we think about the who, we ask ourselves who's enrolled in design programs and simultaneously who's missing, and what can we do to close that gap between who's there and who's not there. Who's teaching in these programs and ultimately impacting change within the landscape. It's obviously very important for a student to see themselves reflected in the professors that they have, because those professors are also teaching, not just teaching, but also working in that design space. And then finally, who's represented in the curriculum. So if the voices from the design canon all tend to be the same and they're all sort of focused on Western ideologies, nobody wins in that space. So some actions that we can take in this space is reimagine how we talk about careers in design. Get away from this idea of talking about it just being a creative field. It's really, really business focused, and it is really, really focused on solutions and strategies. Focus on diversifying portfolio requirements. So we typically have students that apply. All of you folks probably submitted a portfolio. Are there ways for us to measure a student's curiosity and success metrics in the space of design without having some of these formulaic approaches? Decolonize curriculum. So a lot of folks have probably heard this phrase before. What does it mean to bring in non-Western ideologies into the classroom and not just teach the same 5 designers? We can do a lot in this space. Prioritize hiring BIPOC faculty. This one is very, very important. Again, we think about having ourselves reflected in the classroom. It's really important for students to see themselves in that space. The what, so what are we teaching and simultaneously learning? And this one applies to faculty and students. So no faculty ends a semester and says, great, I taught them everything and I learned nothing. I can guarantee you that we learn just as much from you as you learn from us. So what mental models, what viewpoints and ideologies are we carrying with us every day? What microaggressions are we carrying with us? And how do we sort of take those away? What values are expressed through our goals and our work as designers and educators? If you're making cool shit, that's great. But what's the social context behind that? What's the social value to the work that you're bringing? So again, begin with positioning yourself every time you enter a space where people look and feel different than you do. It's important for you to understand who's in the room and more so who's not in that room. Center the experiences and expertise of people of color, trans folks, and those who are who have varied ability statuses. Typically, a lot of these folks have been used to being the subject of research. We're not making them part of the research project with us. It's really, really important to integrate them into that process. Think about where we're teaching. So are these spaces, whether they're physical or virtual, accessible? Are they varied? Are they engaged in active learning strategies? Who has access to learning opportunities outside of the classroom? So if we are committed to equity, what that means is that every student who comes in this wall into this room has access to things like tools, whether that's a lab or digital tools like resources, hardware, software, an internet connection, etc., to ensure that they can succeed in the coursework that they have. Finally, the classroom itself extends well beyond campus, and learning happens on an applied level with industry experts all the time. You're going to hear me say this another time, but we need to start paying interns. I can't believe we're still not doing this. When are we teaching? Are we allowing for varied engagements with materials, one another and our instructors? When and how are we consulting with design leaders and associations on our curriculum? So we need to start providing flexible models for participation and attendance to better accommodate students who may have financial dependence, who need to work and aren't able to be here during the day. Finally, maintaining currency in program outcomes and values. So making sure that we're working with industry so that everything we do is timely and current. And why? Thinking about the why. Why did a student pick a career in design? I know a lot of high school students, often they see a guidance counselor, someone pushes them and says, hey, you were really good in these sort of art focused classes, you should consider a career in design. And then they get here and They think, okay, well, what can I do long-term with this, right? And so the world of design has changed so much in the last 5 years, and we're going to see a lot more of that change. We're also preparing people for careers that don't exist yet, especially in the interaction design space. So it's a really, really great time to be a designer. By that same token, why have faculty chosen to teach? I can tell you that it's a lot of work, and I think a lot of people, they have to do it for the passion of it. And so we have to make sure that people feel comfortable having really important conversations at that table. How are we teaching and learning? Are these spaces approachable and collaborative, or are they independent? How do educators hold and wield power with one another and their students? So modeling inclusivity, it's important for a student to feel like they can challenge a professor. And I don't mean challenge, I mean say, hey, actually, what did you mean by that? Or I didn't think that that was an appropriate use of that word. Or have you considered all of these other folks on the other side of the table? So having a space to have healthy debate and to see other ideologies, I think is really, really, really critical in this space. Okay, that's my last slide. I'm just going to talk very briefly about this. So recognizing how applied this field of design is, I want to talk more about a practice that has major implications for DEI, and it's a practice that many of you will encounter in your third year. So most design schools have close ties to industry through internships and co-ops. They're remarkable opportunities for you to start to meet people, to work with folks who've been in the industry for a long time, and to understand a little bit more about what it means to work at a studio, in-house, or at a firm. Unfortunately, many internships continue to be unpaid so long as they are for academic credit. So if we can understand the financial model here, essentially we're asking a student to pay tuition to then do work that someone else has paid for. Unpaid internships are exploitative and they undermine EDI and DEI efforts. They perpetuate financial hardships and typically are only accessible to students with more affluent backgrounds. So I started a database called payinterns.design to help communicate transparency within the industry around studios and firms that pay interns across Toronto. I encourage you to check it out, especially if you're looking for an internship, which many of you will be. Okay, so I know we have time for discussion, but I wanted to just leave you with one thought. This is a quote that stuck with me for a very long time. Bell Hooks asserted that the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. What we've learned through COVID is that learning spaces now happen everywhere. If we recognize how interconnected this industry is, with faculty being design leaders and design studios informing curriculum changes, we can take this to mean that the classroom itself isn't limited to our traditional campuses. The design classroom of today is composed of the many applied learning experiences that students encounter across our sector. Let's be mindful of the values that we promote and the role we play together in this larger classroom. Thank you.
We do pay our interns, thankfully. And I must, there was a time, I have to say, that we didn't, and we thought it was okay, but there wasn't really a dialogue around why that was okay, and we felt that there was a value exchange at the time. But I think change is everything in design. You'll constantly have to be prepared to ask the questions why, and especially for the students in the room, around things like personas, users, challenging your client. You don't feel like you have the power, but if the client hires you and you're in an environment, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to challenge conversation, ask questions about why. So it's an exciting field. So thanks, Anna. All right. Sean, you're next. Thanks for hanging in there. I'm going to read your bio here. And I realize that it's on the screen now, but I'm still going to read it anyway. Sean Vincent is an artist, graphic designer, and entrepreneur. He founded Vincent Design in 2007 after several years in the design industry. With strong roots in the Medi community, it was in early years of his career that he saw the need for representational design. It became the inspiration for striking out on his own and building a branding and marketing firm with a focus on Indigenous communities, organizations, and companies. From the early days of working in the basement of his St. Boniface home, he knew he wanted to create authentic, memorable work. Since then, Vincent Design has grown to include a team of 17 people, serving local, national, and international clients. He's known for his personable working style and careful intention to create authentic, memorable work that speaks volumes. How about that? Does that sound good?
Sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds
good bio. Right, Sean. Over to you now. We have to, Lauren. How does Sean advance the slides? Because we're I can do it for him.
I could just say next. That could work.
Okay, Sean, that's what I'll do.
All right, sounds good.
I'm gonna flip this around just so you can see the reaction of the audience.
Yeah, they're all really tiny. The way that the interface is with Zoom, okay, I have a box that's literally 1 inch by 2 inches, but within that box, there's a lot of people apparently, and I can't really make out what's going on. But that's okay. How about everyone just kind of like go like this if I say something cool? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to this. I always like talking about design, about what I do and how I do it and how I came to be where I am now. Yeah, you mentioned in your bio personable. Yeah, that's basically me. I'm a lot less, I would just say maybe I'm a lot less academic as the previous, presentation. But that being said, there's still a lot of good meat in this. So let's just get going. We'll just hit next maybe. So we'll just start with a little bit of a bio about myself here. So on the next slide, there we go. So who I am. As you mentioned, I'm Métis. I'm from the Red River Métis community and homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm from Saint Laurent, Manitoba, which is on the very bottom of Lake Manitoba. And who I am, we go a lot by names here, which references our family. So I'm a Vincent, a Campbell, a Chartrand, and a Chaboyer. Those have a lot of meaning in my community, and so that's really important to mention. There's a lot of connections through family and name in the Métis community, and I think it's really important to put forth because it's we're all cousins in the end. So it's something that I just wanted to mention. I am very involved in the community in a lot of ways. I volunteer as much as I can. I try to be on as many boards as I can that impact the community. And I like to sort of have a hand in that. I have a lot of ideas and I try to put them forward. So as you can see, I try and be in as many Indigenous leadership groups as I can. Being Michif, or another way of saying Métis, Michif is more local to our Red River, Assiniboine River region. I thought I would just mention that now because I'm going to say probably Michif more than I will say Métis. So yeah, that's that. I do as much as I can in the community, and sometimes taking my great aunts to bingo. That's very important for them, and it's important for me. Something I also like doing because I grew up doing those fun things, being a part of the community in any way. I try to get myself and be involved in as many powwows and as many ceremony as possible, and that's really important to me. It's important to our community, our employees, and of course our clients. Like you had mentioned, Ian, I am an entrepreneur, so I do run a company. So there are some, aspects that we do, have to be involved in, and I think it's really important from an outside perspective. So that's about me. I'm going to try and really keep it to 5 minutes, by the way. So really try hard here. We'll go next slide. What I do: illustration, design, storytelling, branding, marketing, and most of all, most importantly. And this is really, really connecting to that Indigenous aspect is listening. Every design I do, and most of it from what I do is branding. And a lot of the branding comes from, every design I do actually starts with a pencil and a paper. And from a design perspective, at least from what I've been told, and it kind of fits in what I've been doing, since I can remember as an illustrator. There's something special with a pencil. There's something really special with putting that pencil to paper. And I think a lot of these designs they have an added value, not only for your clients, but for yourself. An elder once told me that the design that you do, the things that you create out of nothing, is part of your spirit. Your spirit is what creates this. It's something beyond what you can see. It's beyond what you can smell and taste and hear. It's beyond that. It comes from something different. And I'll never forget that. His name is Vern Dano, if you have a chance. He's Anishinaabe from Manitoba. And we do a lot of, we get together and we talk a lot. And that's something he always mentioned. And then it's funny because Jackson Beardy, if you're familiar with Indigenous designers and I would say legends in the illustrators and designers back in the 60s and 70s, on par to like Norval Morso or Daphne Ojig. If you don't know these people, I would really recommend you do. They're part of the original, what's called the Indian Group of Seven, and I say Indian because at that time that's what they actually labeled their collective, design collective. But in a lot of his essays, he talked about that. He talked about how designing and illustrating back in the day was a part of you. It was a part of who you are. And anyway, it's something that's really important. So it was amazing because a lot of times it really kind of went along with what I was doing already. So during design school at River College, the graphic design department, then called graphic design, now called something communications. A lot of the instructors were really proponents of using traditional media because they saw a big switch in digital at that time. They knew, I mean, we were all working on 2003, like bubble IMAX, if you can remember those G3s, those little things that you can pick up with the handle. You know, it was at that time, Google wasn't even around. So I think the instructors were really, really smart to know that there was a big change coming. So they really wanted to reinforce the fundamentals of design theory. And this is something that was really important to me. So I just wanted to point that out, that a lot of the design that comes out of this company starts on, I would say almost all of it starts on pencil and paper, which is really important to us. And it's important to our clients. And I can talk further on that later. Next slide. Like I said, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. So what I do, using modern methods, design standards, and Indigenous storytelling to create inclusive design. I do a lot of work for institutions that represent a lot of communities. Southern Chiefs Organization, for instance, is one that represents 34 communities, 34 in like actual reserves, First Nation communities in Manitoba. I believe in Canada, it's the second largest entity that represents Indigenous people. So those are the people that we work with. And within that, you have elders and knowledge keepers and knowledge carriers and people that you have to consult with. So your design has to hold, it has to be, well, it has to be inclusive. It has to include not only culture, different cultures, but different ages, different groups, different demographics of people in all stripes. So in the design process, on top of just having these being approved by the client, has to be approved by community. You have to keep that in mind. So that it's an extra layer of complexity and challenge that goes along a lot with this design. So there's multiple layers of meaning that has to be there. You have to do your research. You have to make sure it has those not only design fundamentals. I mean, that at this point that should be given. This is now going in. You're listening to what they say. You're listening to what they not only what they want, what they need, what their target market is, all the stuff that goes along with the design. But it goes deeper than that. You're in some cases you're representing a community, so that is really, really special here. And to me, from when I started my company back in 2007, knowing exactly what I wanted to do, to start an Indigenous design company before a lot of what's happening today, it was in my heart. I knew I wanted to do it, and now that we have, like you said, the amount of employees that we have and the amount of clients that we're working with, it's really special. And it means a lot. And so here's a small example on some of the stuff that I do. Illustration. This is the illustrations, the illustrative style that I typically kind of go to. And if you go to the next slide. So also my bread and butter, what I love the most is logo design. Back in 2000, when I entered design school, we were given a competition. See, stories like this are what's gonna kill my 5 minutes. But anyway, in 2000, I was actually asked. We entered a logo design competition, and at that time, you don't really know what logo design is. Matter of fact, you don't even know what graphic design was. You go into school and you think, okay, well, illustration. How is graphic design different? And you quickly learn. But during that time, I obviously learned what logo design was and how involved it was, and I fell in love with it. And I've been in love with it ever since. As challenging and as frustrating as it is. And if any of you in the crowd are graphic designers, I'm sure a lot of you realize how challenging logo design can be. You're ultimately putting in so much messaging into a single icon that has to represent an organization with so many values and their own, their mission and their values and what they believe in and where they're trying to position themselves. So it's something that I don't know how, but I absolutely loved, and maybe that's what it was. I just kind of fought it through it and figured it out. But anyhow, adding to the complexity of it being representative or represent Indigenous entities, communities, and companies and corporations, it's an extra that level of complexity. But these are the logos, just as a small select few of the ones that I've done over the years. To give an example, right? In the very, very center of this, you'll see the one that is now flying at the Parliament, representing the, for the National Truth and Reconciliation Day. I did that logo, and it's really very, very proud for that to be not even flying in Ottawa, mind you, but here in Manitoba, where the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation office is. So we got to be, we're very fortunate and honored to be a part of that process. And I'm sure there's going to be questions about how all these came to be at the end, and I'll save all that for later. But in the meantime, I just wanted to show you some of the logos that I've done. Side note, also in the very bottom middle is the one, sometimes you do logos for non-Indigenous entities. That is actually the logo I did for the Pope when he came to visit in Edmonton and Musqueam. So that is that I could probably talk about 2 hours easily just on that process alone. But anyway, we'll go to the next slide. One thing that's really amazing for me as a designer, entrepreneur, all that stuff is I discovered unknowingly that I was sort of using a philosophy, right? You're merging two worlds together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. You are taking stories and legends and communities, and they need to be representative today. You have to give them all those marketing tools that they can do to represent not only their own community, but provide services for their own community, or how about just represent their community to the world, right? So I called it creating bridges. But it wasn't until I was watching a YouTube video by, I think it's Leanne Bidagosame Simpson, is I think her name. I might have watched the middle part, but she was talking about this concept of two-eyed seeing, and it was really kind of spearheaded by a fellow by the name of, he's a Mi'kmaq elder, East Coast, Albert Marshall, and he really helped in better defining this methodology for me, and allowed me to more clearly explain this philosophy. Not only to our employees, but for our clients. And using his words here, it says, it refers to learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of colonial knowledges and ways of knowing, and learning to use both these eyes together for the benefit for all and of all. And further to that, if you have ever time, please Google him and watch his talks. There's lots of them on the old YouTubes. But what's really remarkable was that this philosophy can be applied to more than just design. It can be applied to every single industry, everything. The way you can live this philosophy, you can actually go forth in the world with this philosophy, and it helps put things in perspective. See, you have to see, like, for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, we don't know where we fit. Now, take Métis people, for instance. That's even harder because as a white passing Indigenous person, I've had experiences where I felt out of place in Indigenous situations, and I felt out of place in non-Indigenous situations. But what this does, if you keep this solid in your mind, you go, okay, I know where I fit now. I know this land offers me this. I know I can use this and this. And as long as I have both of those in my mind going forward, I have the confidence to say, listen, I understand and I get it. And I think we can go forward using the best of both worlds. And that's the fundamental of his philosophy. And it's pretty remarkable. So the point being is I discovered that I sort of was on the right path already, sort of building this idea of creating this bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And through methods that after hearing someone like this, kind of like just what I suspected, he figured it out. It was awesome. So if you have a chance, I would definitely Google him and learn more from his wise words. And again, to turn it back all the way around, this is the importance of listening to elders and to what they say. So, and that is my 5 slides, and that's what I do in a nutshell. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion on what I do. And I'm totally open to whatever questions come my way. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sean. That was wonderful. And you did keep it to 5 minutes-ish. Nice. Gavin, you're up next. There's one slight, I have to leave this plugged in because of the Zoom, but you could put it beside it, then no problem. Our last guest, our last speaker is Gavin Barrett. Gavin Barrett is the Chief Creative Officer and CEO of award-winning Toronto agency Barrett Welsh. He's also co-founder of People in Color in advertising and marketing, if anyone's heard of it, called POCAM, and of the Multicultural Marketing Alliance of Canada. Now comes the fun part. In his time in pursuit, I can read this, right? Yeah. In his time in pursuit of big ideas, he has variously nibbled on pig's ears, not a live pig at the time, gone elephant back in the Thai jungle, no elephants were hurt, and gambled in Macau casinos. And he was utterly destroyed, apparently. We'll hear about that. His work has been brought to life on screens and on pages by Deepa Mehta, David Carson, Bruno Barbie, and Louis Ng. His work has run in 35 countries, helped to elect prime ministers, attracted the ire of lawyers for Dolly the cloned sheep, drawn an angry crowd in Lagos, and studied in business texts in Canada and has been studied in business texts in Canada and India, and even received mention in a John Irving novel. Very interesting. What are you going to present on today? DEI. Oh, yeah. Okay, welcome, Gavin. Over to you.
Hi, Sean. That was amazing. Rita, that was inspiring. I have to confess that I'm a big fan of both of yours, so I want to start there. In particular, the two-eyed seeing, by the way, I tell my staff to look that up so that they actually learn about it. So who am I? You've heard a little bit about me from Ian. None of those things are lies. I came here from India originally. I'm from Bombay, now Mumbai. I lived in Hong Kong for 6 years before I immigrated to Canada with my wife and my 2 daughters. My wife is a professor at George Brown, actually. She's back over there. She teaches at the School of Fashion. And so she teaches sustainable fashion, Leah Barrett. I have been surviving, and I'd like to think thriving in the Great White North as an immigrant creative entrepreneur of color since I arrived here in 1996. That's how long I've been here. In 2003, I founded the company I now run and own, Barrett and Welsh. Let me tell you something about Barrett. I'm using notes on my screen. Yeah, I saw what Ian was going through, and I felt bad for myself in advance. So I decided I was going to follow this method. So our agency logo is a tartan turban. This tartan turban represents the 2 founders of the agency, one of whom has just retired from the business, Mike Welsh, and me, even though I have never worn a turban, just to be clear. But it was Mike's idea that the tartan would be his family tartan. It is the Cunningham tartan, and the turban represents me. But it also came to represent Canadian diversity in a general sense, and the work that we do as an agency in terms of the multicultural design and the multicultural marketing that we actually do. We have been helping brands speak Canadian since 2003. What do I mean when I say this? When I say we've been helping brands speak Canadian, I mean we've been helping them see Canadians, as they are in all their diversity, and then to speak to them with respect, with intelligence, and with impact. So that's the work we do, and when I say we help brands speak Canadian, I mean the Canada that looks like this room, and not just the Canada that used to exist maybe in the 1970s. I, a while ago, defined us, therefore, because of the kind of work we do and the kind of agency we are, and I should mention that we are a minority-owned agency, and we are a majority-minority agency, which is a very rare thing in the business if you know anything about the business. But the kind of work we do, because of the nature of it, I've always said it makes us Canada's only true mainstream agency because everyone's doing some other kind of work, which makes them, what used to be called mainstream, but is now a form of cultural advertising of a previous majority group, not the majority, not the mixed majority group that exists, especially in a city like Toronto. We specialize in communications and in design. We do a lot of branding. We do a lot of advertising. We do both things that benefit our clients with lasting positive impact that goes much deeper than profit. And this is sort of a mainstay for us as an organization, as an agency. We design and communicate to create inclusion right from the outset. Everything that we are in our DNA is about designing and creating inclusion from the outset. We do this with creative work that creates access for racialized minorities. That's our focus. This is differentiating empathetic work, and these are words that have showed up already in this evening. Differentiating empathetic work of lasting value to the communities that we serve. The communities that we are and our clients and all of us in this room, for example, all belong to. We are a certified B Corporation as it happens, which means, and I'll talk about this probably in the Q&A, which means we are a company for whom people and planet are the equals, if not the superior of profit. We are a Canadian Aboriginal and minority supplier. We're a certified supplier because of the minority ownership of the company. And the company and me personally co-founded Multicultural Marketing Alliance of Canada to focus on and to champion a higher standard of communications with Canada's immigrant communities, especially immigrant communities of color. And because I've lived and worked in this business for such a long time and have suffered it and survived it, I, with a bunch of others, founded POCAM, People of Color in Advertising and Marketing, in the early months of the pandemic. POCAM exists entirely to change the face of the industry so that it looks more diverse. And I'll just give you one stat, and I won't go on too long about it. But Toronto, the city proper, is 52% visible minority. And the ad industry is 73%, 72% white. So, and the change that happened in Toronto didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time. So everyone could see the change, but nobody changed with the change. And we have arrived at a point of time, and where we're, those of us who are of color, those of us of racialized minorities, friends from the Indigenous community, professionals from the Indigenous communities, have all noticed that we're not present on the other side of the table. We're beginning to be seen on screen and on page more suddenly, but we still don't have the kind of power that changes the nature of those communications, the nature of the design that we get to see out in the world. And so a group of us banded together in early 2020, and we formed People of Color in Advertising and Marketing. And we were sort of thinking, do we have an organization for people like us? And we found out there wasn't one. And so we started there. And then in June, actually at the end of May, George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And we knew that something massively important had to be done about it immediately. And this was a common realization. We weren't special in this, but it was a realization that really accelerated action for us. And we created the Call for Equity, which is 12 principles that we asked all organizations in the industry to sign. And if you were a client organization, a brand, there were 15, there were 3 more principles, recognizing that clients have a lot of power because they control the money. Insisting on change on multiple levels, hiring equity, wage equity, there are 12 principles, very easy to look it up. wearepocam.ca is the website, and all the calls for equity are listed there. The call for equity got a lot of attention and a lot of traction, and it continues to grow. I'm very happy to say we had about 600 people sign as allies and supporters and as demanders that the industry change and meet these calls. And we had some 123 organizations sign up and commit to meet the principles in the call, which was huge progress for us. And we're seeing organizations now, we've created a report card where they can tell us how they're progressing, are they keeping their promises, were these empty promises, and so out of the 12 principles, we're seeing people hit 6 and 7 and 12 out of 12. We have 2 who have hit 12 out of 12. Today I wanted to just unveil something, just out of nowhere. I've been sitting on this for a long time. It's been in beta, and at RGD, actually, the diversity and inclusion group at RGD has been my group of beta testers. I unveiled it there a while ago, I think almost a year ago, and I've been tweaking it. For somebody who works in design, this is not going to be a pretty document. I'm going to tell you this now, because the focus was not about making it look good. And actually, I'm taking a leap out of Anna's apology for the busyness of your slide. This is worse. Your slide was fantastic. This is terrible design. It's basically a Google Doc with words on it, warning, but it is a free toolkit for an anti-racist, pro-inclusion creative practice. So there are 12 principles in this particular document. The first principle is be a force for reconciliation. The second is actively use inclusive language. The third is create access for the excluded. Support initiatives to change the industry. Fifth, move past white aesthetics as a systemic default setting, because and I'm gonna just explain what I mean by that. With the most common example, and Ian's actually heard me use this example in RGD settings. If I were to say, name the most famous piece of art in the world, the first thing almost everyone goes to is the Mona Lisa. No one goes to The Great Wave by Hokusai. As an example, I'm just going to pick 2 examples from opposite ends of the world. And that's what I mean by, the default setting of the white aesthetic. Number 6, hire more IBPOC owned and led firms to do your advertising and design. Yeah, sure, it's selfish because, I own one of those firms, but believe me, this is a path to justice. Number 8, use more IBPOC designed typefaces. Surprisingly granular, but the world of typeface design, of font design, is largely white-led. And if we can support those designers that exist, who are not white, but creating fonts, and we will actually see a huge lift in the design force. I missed one, I think. Advertise in IBPOC-owned media that serve IBPOC communities. You notice I'm using IBPOC, by the way?
Yeah.
I'm putting Indigenous first intentionally. BIPOC's very easily said, it rolls off the tongue, but this was a commitment we made as an organization, as an agency, to ensure that we put Indigenous principles and reconciliation first, especially for this land that we live on. I think that is a fundamental act of recognition of primacy and priority. So if you want to scan this, I've put a QR code on the screen. This will take you to this very ugly document that I've crafted very painstakingly with all the design talent I have, which is a long list of things that you can do under each of these principles. So where was I? Use more Ivy Park design typefaces, include more diverse talent in your casting. This is the one thing we seem to be doing better since 2020. Number 10, find more diverse stock photos and imagery in general. Number 11, consciously commission Ivy Park creatives. And number 12, work with Ivy Park film, TV, photography, creative production, talent, businesses in general. So those are the 12 principles in the toolkit. There's not going to be just 12. There's probably going to be many more. This is going, when I said earlier, it's an unfinished work. It's going to always be unfinished, I hope, because the work of inclusion should never stop. So we will keep adding to it. You'll notice in the document, if you visit it, that there is an invitation to submit suggestions and, resources, and to even possibly volunteer to take it forward. But that's what it's there for. It's there to keep improving and to keep improving us all. And finally, I'm going to end with a very selfish, this is the truly selfish shill for my own. So I have to say, first of all, that I've been a perpetual outsider in my entire life, even back in India where I grew up. I come from a very tiny minority community in India, which has got similarities to the Métis community, as it happens. It has mixed race background from way back when. And there's a lot of, it's actually protected with a special status in the Constitution of India. It's called the Anglo-Indian community, and it's literally very close to what the Métis community is in terms of the similarities. It had privileges at some time, and then it lost those privileges spectacularly, and all of those things. So I come from that community, and I felt, because of it, felt like an outsider. Then I went to Hong Kong, where I felt like an outsider again. Then I came to Canada, where I felt like an outsider again. I'm also a complete outsider to the world of design. I have to tell you, I've designed my entire career, but I never got trained as a designer. I trained myself. I have a design firm. We've done award-winning design. It's all a miracle to me. I have no damn clue how it happened, but here we are. So I am an outsider, and I will warn you that is so what am I actually? The one thing I'm not an outsider in is I'm a writer. Funnily enough, I'm a writer who designs, and so my shill is another slide. So I write poetry, which is the worst thing to write. Worst thing to write if you want to make a living. So don't write poetry for a living. I had to get into design and advertising to make a living. And that's where I found made my living. But I've always written poetry, and that is a QR code that will take you to my book. It's published by Moenzi House, which is an indie publishing house that focuses on Canadian literature of diversity. So you'll notice that is a consistent theme for me in everything I've done, and that includes the publishing house that has published my book of poetry, which is called Understand. By the way, that's the right way to say that. Understand, like the place names. All right, and that's it for me. And that was probably way more than 5 minutes.
Like 5 minutes session.
Ish. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
That's great.
It's the advertising.
Oh, and there you go. There's your, and we'll share this on our post in a couple of weeks when we summarize everything up. But now it's time for some Q&As just to wrap up with, and we have a couple of questions that I'd love to open it up to the floor. But I have one great question here that is for Anna to start, since you started. And the question is about measuring curiosity, and it's around, and we see this a lot because we do a lot of portfolio reviews for students, and after your 4th year when you're looking for jobs, this definitely comes up. So how do you see the portfolio review process, assessment process, changing to be more equitable and inclusive?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that we get often. And I think both a very easy thing to do and a very difficult thing to do. So statistically, for example, in our graphic design program, we get about 500 applicants every year. We have about 120 seats, depending. And typically, especially for students that are coming right out of high school, they have similar kinds of projects that they're including. So we see the same kinds of aesthetics, we see the same kind of projects, we see the same kind of skills. I think measuring curiosity is a very difficult thing to do. But less or more so than looking for the kinds of skills that people have, because anyone, I mean, we know from COVID that anyone can learn software in a weekend. But I think to me, it's that storytelling piece. So you can already tell when someone is starting out as a designer, what the story is that they're telling about who they are, how they created something. I think that curiosity piece is also well communicated when you talk about process. And I think, you know, I would rather see 2 or 3 really expressive things than 15. Sometimes people put together a portfolio and it has to be perfect and they have to put all of their best work in there. I think it doesn't need to, the stakes don't need to be that high. And to me, measuring something like curiosity can be exhibited in, are you able to talk a little bit about some of your design experiences, or why you want to get into this field, or how you want to change that. So one of the things that we've done is add a bit more of a writing component so you can tell a bit more of your story. And why this is a career you want to get into. We're seeing a lot of students applying who are using language like design for social good. This is definitely not a thing in the last decade. So a lot of folks that want to enter design, not just to do logo design and not just to create, which not that there's anything wrong with that by any means, but we are seeing more of that thinking side. So making more spaces for people to tell stories through video, to do sort of interview style videos and bio videos of themselves, I think is a good way to get to know somebody. And also, it's difficult to measure whether or not someone's going to succeed in a program. There are lots of things that can happen to somebody when they start a program that can impact how well it goes for them. So I think giving opportunities for different kinds of assessments, I think are really critical.
Excellent, great response. And I could say from being on the other side, and Sean and Gavin may have something to say. You know, you're always curious to learn about the person that you're interviewing, and it is, you know, it's tough for that person because they're nervous, but you do want to hear a story. You want to understand their authentic, you know, why. Tell us why you are in design. Why do you want to work here? Why do you think this is a decent company? Do you either of you have anything you want to share about that, being on the other side, offering that kind of inclusive, equitable kind of environment for?
Yeah. Well, you know, so I meet, one of the commitments we made a long time ago is that any of us in leadership in our company would meet immigrants, especially because we are immigrants largely. So we sort of have an open door, and there's a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear for immigrants who are trying to find their way in Canada. And the number one expression of that fear is that they're worried they will run into that great Canadian experience barrier, you know, and it's a catch-22 because how are you going to get any if you don't have any, and, you know, where do you begin and so on. And one of the things I actually try to explain to a lot of the people I see is that there are 2 things. One is to celebrate the joy in their own work, because if they're truly creative people and they love what they do, try to find a way to bring that to the surface so that it speaks for itself. And it doesn't have to be work that is, you know, it doesn't matter that the work might be in another language or in another graphic language. You know, all that matters is that the passion and joy for the expression that produced that piece of beauty is presented. So, and you know, my point is that actually disarms the person on the other side of the table. It is that story that's missing, because we all want to know how that thing got created. What's the magic that made it unfold?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Sean, do you have anything to comment on that, or?
How much time do you have? No, I'm just
I know, we haven't even talked about logos yet, but
oh
yeah.
my goodness. Yeah, I mean, I can only talk about, you know, my experience when I went through design school, and I thought that the system was pretty awesome. Like what they did, at least the instructors in my school, is they They knew what to focus on. Like if you go to design school, you can go anywhere from that, right? I mean, you can literally become a graphic designer, you can become an environmental designer, you can do all these things, interior design. Like you can do really a lot of things from learning the fundamentals, the basics of form, all those, you know, classic design methods and things. I honestly don't think I would be anywhere where I am now if I did not have those fundamentals, right? So it was the instructors, and similar to what Anna was saying, you know, I'm sure going through all of those entry portfolios, it's got to be so hard, right? But it's looking for those unique things, those little details, those little hints of extra creativity, something that tells them that they went the extra mile, that they added in. Like I think that obviously plays a huge role. But I mean, this is going back. I was in school in 2000, so it was quite a while ago now. But I mean, I know it's different now. Like there's just the demographics are different, and I mean, in all honesty, it's got to be so hard, right? But I think the fundamentals still need to be there. You know, you still have to have those in there. And then from that, you can tell your story, right? Design is different from illustration, right? If you just Google illustration versus design, the entire process is different. How you present that is different. How you even imagine that is different. I mean, there's so many quotes about this, you know, the difference between the two. And then that's what makes design amazing. It is just those extra steps that you have to take to make sure that, you know, because you're not necessarily doing it for yourself. In a lot of ways, you're getting paid to do this. So you have to make sure it represents your client appropriately. So there's certain things that have to be there. But I think those fundamentals have to be there. Yeah, that's sort of my first take anyway.
That's great.
With that.
I want to be conscious of the class that's here, because I know you actually have a class to go to, right? Or this is class. Did anyone here want to ask any questions of the group? Now that you've got, not to put you on the spot, but we are putting you on the spot. Does anyone have anything there? Burning questions?
Any at all?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, well, not funny, but we a big part of the user-centered design, UX design business is doing a deep dive on people, right? And understanding who's involved. And we talked about, it's not always about people who we think all the included ones. We do have to ask the question, who are we excluding? And often clients don't know who we're excluding because they're focused on who we're including. And so that's where an open conversation needs to happen. But it's a great process to go through. It's done diligently and done with quantitative, qualitative kind of research, interviewing, observation. The problem is it's a slow process, takes time, but if you're really interested in it, it's an incredible way to learn about people, right? So, there's a question.
So when you're going through that research process, so you're developing that screeners, get the people who are qualified to speak on what you're researching, how do you challenge either those third-party companies or the people who are developing that screener and actually going through the participants to make sure that while you're trying to make sure that these people are qualified to speak on what you're researching or have experienced whatever you're researching, how do you make sure that you're covering everybody who's included in that population? How do you challenge those third-party screeners to make sure that they're also looking for everybody who's involved in whatever you're researching?
It's a very good question. It's tough to challenge certain parts of that process, especially when the client, you know, depending on how far you can push. But you know, others may have some other questions. I know we've got involved in screeners before, and recruitment company can be biased, the questionnaire can be biased. So it's really hard to kind of find a certain type of people. It depends what you're looking for. Maybe you can't find it, so then you have to rewrite the screener, or you've got to go deeper, spend more time. Service design is a great process for going there, right? Because you can keep going and observing. But there's no simple answer. I mean, you're at a great company that hopefully you can push the limits and bridgeable. So not a lot of companies do service design, right? So anyway, great question, but that's a complex one. All right, let's take some other questions. Anyone have any questions in the room before we go over to ask Gavin about B Corp? Yes,
I wanted
here, actually, this might be a little easier.
Hi. I wanted to ask about this of storytelling. Something that has been brought up a couple of times in all of your presentations. And I was wondering about the practice of storytelling when it comes to DEI and how, yeah, I'm still formulating kind of my thoughts and even my question around this, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the intersection of the practice that we call storytelling and design communication.
And inclusion. Did you hear that, Sean?
I was tried hard. I I did my best, but unfortunately, no.
Yep, it was a little bit about storytelling. How do you perform? How do you conduct? How do you create? How do you do your storytelling with a more inclusive lens?
Oh.
Do you approach it differently? Could be one way of asking that question.
Yeah, it's completely different. So, and it's not only different in its subject matter and the client, but it's different for every client. Like you have to realize like how many different First Nation communities and Métis locals there are in at least I'll even say Western Canada, and within those they're all different. The big thing for any logo of substance, I guess, or importance, we actually have a questionnaire, but aside from that, we recommend like, listen, get a council, get a group of people, like usually an elder circle or knowledge keeper circle. And especially if it's for something really important, we want everyone involved. So, and then within that, oftentimes we have a meeting at like a local, like an inn, like a hotel or something like that, where you can actually have like a business setting, and we invite them and we have food and we listen and we ask them questions and we want to hear their stories. We want to hear why they're creating this organization or this entity. And then what you'll oftentimes find is that they'll start opening up and they'll tell stories, and those little details that you listen to, those stories, they might talk about them as a child picking a certain type of flower or seeing a particular animal at a certain time or something like that, right? Those little details are the things you're going to listen to, and then you're going to take that, and then that's what gives you your direction. Now with that, you create something, and then when you present it, it's just that much more, has that much more meaning. On top of that, for me, I love stories. I mean, storytelling and legends and traditional teachings, I would say, whether they're the 7 grandfather teachings, whether they're Métis, sash and fire teachings, all those things, you also keep in the back of your mind, because those always sometimes come up and are added into a lot of the designs. So in a way, you're putting yourself in a little bit in each of those designs. You're putting yourself into that. And then that makes it authentic. And that's what they're after. They're looking for this authenticity. And that is what resonates, I think, a lot with from an Indigenous perspective. It's not empty. It's not thin. It has meaning. And when you show them the meaning, if you show them that you've done your research and you show them that you paid attention and you've listened, it really, really connects, right? And of course, you have to make the logo look good. And then if you do that, you're kind of hitting both sides, right? Because you still have to, what you're doing is you're taking what they need, and you're still applying that modern design theory, all that stuff that we're talking about and learning about in school. So you're walking in two worlds here. And so when you provide that to them, they are now confident in you. They're confident in what they have. They're proud of it. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking to be included in today's world. Digital websites, social media, all the marketing stuff is really it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's daunting. It's daunting for a lot of communities. They don't know how to do it, and so you have to help them along. And once you do that, keeping in mind the biggest thing is future generations. You sometimes need to make these things look good for the youth and the next generations, because a lot of these elders and communities have so much knowledge they need to put forward into the next generation. So you're always keeping these things in mind. There's multiple tiers and things, and for me anyway, when I try and do these things, that's all super, super, super important to make sure that within those communities, you're including everybody. So yeah, storytelling is a huge part of it in a different way. It's just done different for every client. I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Thank you. That was a very good, very thorough explanation. Thanks, John. I was going to just ask about B Corp. Is it? Questions are coming up now on the left side. Okay. Yes.
How do we cater to members of different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures, different identities without broadening our audience too much? We learned a couple of weeks ago in our 2D visualization class that you need a target audience to design effectively. How do you balance specificity and inclusivity?
Anyone want to touch that one?
I can take a stab. Yeah. I think the complicated thing is that people see inclusivity as still niche and to specific folks. Inclusivity means that everyone gets to be there, right? And so I think sometimes when we think about modeling design for a specific demographic or to target specific folks, what we're trying to say is that that's not for anybody else. But really good design includes everybody. When you think about universal design, when you think about even just the basics of when you go to the grocery store and the doors open automatically, it's not just for folks that don't have hand dexterity, it's for everybody, right? It makes things a little bit more simple for everybody that's got their hands full or whatever the case may be. And I think that we don't think about interaction design and practical design and strategic design in those same ways. We think about who is our market and who do we cater to. And I think as a person who likes nice things, I'm just going to say that, I think we need to get away from design being a vehicle for consumerism and for design being a vehicle for change. Like that's the space that we really need to be in. And I'm thinking about many of the large problems that we have in the world today, a lot of them that are DEI focused, a lot of them that are climate and migration focused. If we don't stop designing things that nobody needs and start focusing on solutions that people actually need, we're going to be in big trouble. So the task ahead for you folks is a big one. So pick the values in design that you think are meaningful, and it is possible to design for everyone.
Excellent. Yeah, of course.
That as well. One of the other things I think is to consider the role for design in creating equity. So that because equity and inclusion are not synonymous, we've begun treating them synonymously, but they aren't actually. And sometimes the excuse of having to narrow focus is used to exclude. And we have to be on guard that is not what is in process. We have to, so in the practice of inclusive design and inclusive design thinking, we have to constantly be vigilant and ask ourselves and challenge ourselves and examine whether our own biases are surfacing, whether convenience or expediency is being made more important. And convenience and expediency, are actually very closely linked to the almighty budget, which really is capitalism at work. Saying, we've only got so much, but the fact of the matter is people are being kept away from, having access. People, when we do not practice equity in our design, then we are actually keeping people outside the door, and so one of our jobs is to constantly challenge that. I think if we're going to be truth speakers to the world in which we practice, because that world pays us as designers, but we still have to be able to ask those hard questions and say, but why are we not doing this? Why are we not including this? Why are we choosing? Why can't we take an inclusive approach that actually, and I'll give you an example from my practice that makes it a little bit more concrete. If we're talking to South Asians, the majority of South Asians in this country speak English, so do we really need to, communicate in Punjabi and Tamil? Could we get away with just doing communications in English? And the answer is we could get away with it, but why do we want to do just that? Why would we not take an inclusive approach and add Punjabi and Tamil and Urdu, to the language mix, so that for those people who rely on those languages or depend on those languages, for whom access is denied if they can't navigate through the portal that the language offers them, then we're not doing our job right. So just as an example, as a result of that, that kind of questioning. Punjabi has just been added recently to an ex-client of mine, their ATM screens, you know, for decades, those ATM screens were not accessible to those who only spoke Punjabi. And there are a sufficient number to warrant their inclusion. And it's as simple as that. You know, the existence of somebody warrants their inclusion. And I think that we need to keep that in mind always.
That's great. We'll just take a few more questions, but I have a question for Sean. Sean, bringing the truth, do you have any ideas on ways for, let's say, business designers to bring the truth and reconciliation report kind of to the forefront with clients? How do we talk about it? Do you have any thoughts on, is there a way to integrate it into the work that we do when we engage, let's say, in discovery?
That's a pretty heavy question. It's funny because I actually have the report right in my hand right here, pocket size.
Okay.
To answer your question, it's we try and do it as like, you know, in all the calls to action, there actually is one. I was actually rebranding Red River College's Indigenous department. They have these teachings. And in doing so, it actually made me read the call to action regarding art and design. And there is no like mention of representation of community art, which was really interesting. I brought that up to the elder circle and they were all like, we didn't know that. And so we're still learning, you know, at the same time, you know, but to answer your question, we do it automatically, I guess, through our clients. Like Southern Chiefs organization, for example, is spearheaded by amazing leaders, and they know, right? And so they oftentimes will explain to us, you know, what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it. And here's what we need, Sean and your team, this is what we need. And so we try to do that. Like we try to adhere to as many of the calls to action as possible. I mean, you can only do so many within what we can do based on some of the clients. I mean, they're doing many things at once, but we always have it in our minds, and you know, we always try and go back to, you know, at least the ones that we have control of. And especially in our office, talking about, you know, the philosophy in our office is always that, like we have an open door policy, actually, believe it or not, where anyone can come in at any time and we talk to them. And so we're trying to do as many as possible. For instance, we actually have currently the Foundation of Hope Society through Gregory Schofield. There's sort of like a traveling display, an exhibit that goes across Canada, and we're hosting that this week. We have it in sort of our office. It's actually, you know, we even made a poster. Thank you, as one of my coworkers here. We have a poster. It's called it's called Forgotten: The Métis Residential Schools Experience. So we have an exhibit, and we have crafts, and that's, you know, one of the calls to action is just that, right? So we're trying to do our best when we can, and so this is an example, and this is something we have going on till I think October 2nd or 4th, I think. And so we sacrificed our boardroom. We don't even have a boardroom anymore. This display is so large, it's taking our entire boardroom, which is great. And it's bringing people in. And if you're not aware on where we are literally in the not only in the center of Canada, but we're in the core of Winnipeg, in the core of the North End, which, you know, according to, you know, Maclean's magazine, we're one of the racist cities in the country, which is just, you know, something that I always keep in my mind. But we exist. Our company exists in the heart of one of the most diverse and I would say Indigenous communities in Canada, you know, and we're very proud to be here. So we're trying to turn this around and make an effort in bringing awareness to this. So to answer your question, how are we, you know, are we using the calls to action? Yes, as much as we can, when we can. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
That's great. Thank you. We're sort of running out of time, so we should wrap up. But is there anything else that anybody is dying to ask any of our speakers here while they're here now?
So we're essentially going to be talking a little bit about balancing needs of the user and the company or the business. And I think what I really want to try to focus on from this question is how does somebody that is a young designer, maybe an intern at a place or just like freshly starting in the industry, how do they really talk about these things in a way where they're not offending people that might be, in the leadership roles and saying, okay, maybe we do need to make a decision which we think is better than maybe somebody else who's suggesting something else. And how do we do that without maybe offending them or saying we're better than you, or we have more, I guess, understanding of the particular user that we're talking about here, more than maybe you do.
I think if your boss gets offended, they're the wrong boss.
I'm going to say the same thing. Yeah.
So I think work culture is very important. Yeah, I'm sure that you probably have way more experience in this space working in ad and marketing, but to me, I think we really need to create spaces where it's okay to challenge an idea. Lots of people challenge me every day. I'm thankful for it. I definitely wouldn't be the person that I am without it. And I think having a boss that allows you that grace, I think is very, very important. In the same way that you may have times in the semester where one of your students says like, actually, is that really true? Or I read this thing that refutes that a bit, right? And I think having open dialogue, whether or not the person on the other side is correct doesn't really matter. I think the dialogue of getting to the space where you understand each other is important.
Just again, so I'm Indian, so I'm very argumentative, and it's a culture in our agency that argument springs up naturally, which is actually amazing. Anyone feels free to argue. It doesn't matter where in the organization they are, and that allows for some, politely in other worlds it might be called debate. I like to call it argument because that is what it is, but making room for that and it's not about ego. But that said, there is another problem, which is within an agency, you can have that, you can foster that, but when you go out into the world and you're dealing with a client who might get offended because you're challenging something that is dear to them, that they've espoused for a long time, and that's another balancing act that you've got to walk. There's a technique that we use to help us get past that as a design agency that's presenting a concept that we know is going to be controversial, that is going to be, they're going to have to give up something, and we try to put science on the table, and that's our method. Our secret weapon is science, and by that I mean we walk them through such a long journey where so many questions have been asked and so much consideration has been given for all points of view, and then we brought back every point of view to them and given them every chance to refute those points of view. And when all is done, we then put the idea on the table. Now there's no room for disagreement, to embrace something that is uncomfortable, necessarily uncomfortable. So it takes a lot of patience, but it can be done.
Healthcare is a great field to work in if you want to find, I think, the clients that you can push back on that are open, I think, to debate. Gavin and I fortunately worked on a project with a local organization for women's health, and they were extremely open-minded, very opinionated, but open-minded. And Gavin's team did a diversity report, and it kind of blew their mind because they just realized how much they didn't think about the population. They were aware of the population, but they weren't aware of all of the interaction details, design, visuals, just all these like little things that you can't possibly think of if you're an expert in healthcare. So things are changing, the tides are changing, and healthcare is one community that's open to this space. Yeah.
So question for Gavin along the same kind of line. When we're in the client space, is there a specific method or process that you can help kind of break that tension or break the ice when you're starting to ask questions that help their client think more inclusively, or to help their clients, think that equity should be given higher priority, depending on preferences.
So, yeah,
Did you get that, Sean? A little bit? No? Okay.
Sorry. No, I
uh,
didn't.
If it was asking about an icebreaker with clients, how do you bring this topic up around DEI or equity inclusion? Is there a way that you kind of break the ice with your clients? For Gavin?
yeah, it's, so there are two ways. One is terrifying. Sorry, and that happened because just in my case, for example, I have a bit of a reputation of being a rabble rouser and stirring the shit, and now I'm in the room and I'm saying something that's controversial directly to their face. It's not the best. Let me say that. You don't want people to be terrified of you. You want people to be working with you, and you actually want them to buy your idea. So that'll go so far, and then you're screwed. So the better way, I think, is, and my favorite way, is the stakeholder interview process. It's not, again, patience is everything. And having counter points of view that come from within the organization, the client organization. So there are lots of clients who are mired in their traditional ways or their one culture ways, and need help seeing other culture ways, multiple culture ways. It's only when they get feedback from their own organization that they open up, that they realize how bad things are. And that technique of using stakeholder interviews at multiple levels and then bringing it back, bringing everyone around the table completely anonymously. We're not revealing who said what, and protecting identities fully, but then having a robust discussion sort of forces a sufficient amount of humility on the client organization, especially the leaders. And I think nobody wants to be the asshole that said, I don't give a shit,
All right.
at that point, which is a different kind of thing, a better kind, I think.
Humility is a
Yeah.
great word.
Humility.
Exhibit. Okay, I think we will wrap up. And by the way, there's a ton of food over there. Please eat. Class, when you leave, class must eat. Unless you're lactose intolerant, because there's a lot of cheese. So just to wrap up, thank you so much to Anna, Sean, and Gavin for bringing your expertise here today. Especially you, Sean. I know it was a tough flight getting here, right?
I'm expecting my courier of food. Is it coming soon?
Yeah, I know. It should arrive. What time is it in Winnipeg? It's yeah.
It's sitting at 6:46, and
Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm pretty hungry. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sorry about that package. We didn't send it. But thank you to all three of you. This is an important topic for us. It's the beginning, not the beginning of the topic, the beginning of a conversation, I think, for a large number of organizations. And we believe it's important to us as a company. And I wanted to sort of broaden the conversation to involve more organizations that maybe haven't heard the news or are unaware of this approach. Thanks to George Brown for the space. The next event's on collaboration. We do want to talk about the future of collaboration and work at home, work at office, virtual, physical, hybrid. What is it going to be? What is going to be the right fit? I think we're going to find out. TJ's in the back. We're about to share offices soon. We're all going to learn what it's going to be like in the future in the next 3-6 months. That's the future, right? Who knows? We might be doing the same thing in 6 months, but we'll find out. Thanks, everyone.